Last year, almost 11,000 millionaires left the United Kingdom. Prior to that, thousands more left. And every single year, more rich people are deciding to leave the United Kingdom. That raises a question: what exactly is happening with the British economy that rich people don't want to stay? And it's a real serious problem, because when a rich person leaves the country, it's not just a random person who left. So if you have built a business that's worth millions of dollars and now you're leaving and taking that business, taking your employees, or perhaps you're simply taking the jobs and you will create those jobs in another country. Soon, sometime in the future, the government will not be able to collect enough taxes in order to keep all of these programs. On the other side, millions of people are flooding into the United Kingdom. They're coming to build a far better life. But when they're coming, they're not coming with their businesses. They're not coming with their capital. Maybe sometime in the future they will build that business, but not today. But when they do that and realize the exact same thing that millionaires today are realizing about the UK, they will also probably leave. The UK has one of the worst taxation systems in the world. It's taxing people so much that it starts to make no sense whatsoever. There is no shame in paying taxes, because if the government is taking that money and using that in order to improve the country, build better roads, build better schools for your kids, and have a much better healthcare system, nobody minds paying that much taxes. But when you're highly taxed and most of that money goes somewhere where most people don't even have a clue, that's where the problem actually starts. The most popular sort of taxes is, of course, income tax. And income tax is the most popular tax anywhere in the world, whether it's the United States, European Union, or any other wealthy country. Any income that is being made below £12,500 is not taxed. And that's where the good news stops. Because if you're making less than that, then you're barely surviving. If you make more than that, then suddenly your tax rate goes to 20%. That is much higher than the taxation that you're paying in the US. And it gets even worse for the people who are making much more than that, anything between $50,000 to $125,000. Their tax rate goes to 40%. If you would make the exact same amount of money in the US, you will pay for anything up to $94,000. You are paying probably like 12% in taxes. It goes higher than that, up to 20%, but that's for the income that goes up to $200,000. So if you take the US taxation system, where people think that it's really high, and compare it to what's happening in the United Kingdom, that's when you understand that maybe compared to the UK, the United States is a tax haven. If you're making more than that, it goes to 45%. People who are making that much money are questioning themselves. Should I be making that much money? What's the point for me to make $200,000? What's the point of me making more than £125,000 when anything above that, half of it will directly go to the government? The motivation to work harder suddenly or instantly, I would say, goes dramatically to zero. And only the people who really want that money are going to do that. But besides those taxes, everybody who is employed has to pay anything between 8 to 10% in national insurance contribution. So if you are paying 40% plus 8 to 10%, that brings it to 50%. And people who are making above this much are paying around 55% in taxes. If you are a very skilled person living in the United Kingdom today, let's say you're like a very good doctor or an engineer or maybe an IT guy, and you know that you could be making at least a few $100,000 anywhere all across the globe, why would you stay in the UK? With all of these skills, you know that you are going to become much faster financially independent if you have left to a country where the tax rate is half of that. But it doesn't stop there. The corporate tax rate is also worse than the United States and most of the other countries whose economies are growing. If you are making less than $50,000, for example, you have to pay an almost 20% in tax rate. You might say that it's not a big deal, but what is £50,000? Like, ask yourself a question, like, is that a lot of money? £50,000 is absolutely nothing. It's like you are barely making any kind of real money. And if you're a country, if you're the government, you want to tell the population that if you are making less than £50,000, you should pay zero in taxes. That's what will incentivize people to start working and building businesses, because £50,000, like a corner shop somewhere in there, somewhere that is barely surviving and making that much money, and even that person has to pay a 20% tax rate. Like, if you take that and you compare it, for example, to companies in the United States, If I'm not mistaken, Boeing like literally pays something between like 7 or 8% in tax rate because they have all of these financial schemes they are using in order to reduce their tax system. But if you are making more than $250,000, then your tax rate suddenly goes up to 25%. Because when you're building a business, like trust me, building a business is one of the hardest things you can do. It's not like having a job. It's not like being a doctor. You're literally going to put into that your soul. And there are chances that you're going to fail. And chances that you will fail are much higher than the chances that you're going to succeed. And that's a huge gamble that anybody can possibly take. And that means that there might be years, 2, 3, 5, and sometimes 10 years of super hard work to build one successful business that is going to be making millions of dollars. And you want to tell that person that you're going to take a significant portion of their money for building that business. He would rather go and live on the minimum wage and just pay, I don't know, like 20% in taxes and just have a stable job instead of taking such a huge risk. It gets even worse when you start hiring people. For every person that you hire, you have to pay almost 14% in national insurance contribution tax, as if the 8 to 10% was not enough. Do we have a motivation to hire anybody? Of course not. You're going to think twice. I'm going to hire this person. He's going to be a trouble for me for years to come because I have to pay an extra 14% for every single person. I would rather go hire somebody in a country that does not have this kind of tax. Let's say that I have purchased stocks and a year from now or 2 years from now, I'm selling my stocks in order to cash out. I have to pay 20% taxes for making that kind of an investment. First of all, there should not be any kind of capital gain tax. And if there is, it should not be more than 2 or 3%. Now in the US, there is a progressive system. So it can be like 10, 12, sometimes 8%. And there are some people who pay up to 20%, but not the vast majority of people. So if you're a millionaire making money from the stock market, let's say I built an investing portfolio of, I don't know, $1 million, and I'm cashing out some of my investments in order to pay for my bills. Now I have to pay 20% in taxes. I would rather go to a tax haven and pay 0% in taxes because there are such options today in the world. I simply can go to Ireland and pay a much lower tax rate than just paying in the United Kingdom. You also have like a real estate tax, property tax, whatever taxes that you have. But the most interesting tax is the value added tax, which stands at 20%. After paying all of these taxes, you think that you don't pay any more taxes. Now that's where the real taxation actually starts, because anything that is being purchased in the UK, you have to pay a 20% tax to buy that. So if you suddenly made $100,000 and you saved that much money for the last couple of years in order to buy that BMW or that car that you always dreamed about, you will go to the showroom and you have to pay an extra 20% for buying that. Why? That's what value-added tax is all about. It means that you buy stuff and you pay 20% in taxes. You pay just half of your income in taxes, and then your employer also paid an extra 15% on behalf of you for hiring you. That could potentially be like part of your salary. And now you pay like 70% in taxes. You're coming to spend that money in the grocery store or to buy stuff in order for your living. You are paying an extra 20%. So if you add up all of these taxes, you'll find out that you have already made millions of dollars. The only reason that you're not rich is because 80% or 90% of it literally went directly into the pockets of the politicians who don't know what they're doing. You see, there is a very real difference in mentality between a politician and a business person. If I'm building a business, I understand the value of money. I know what it means, what a dollar really is, because I have to make sure that every dollar is spent productively in the business for the business to grow. If I'm spending that money unproductively, business is going down. I cannot hire more people. I cannot grow the business. I'm not going to make more money. So I have an incentive in order to build a business, make more money. When a politician gets into an office, he does not have that incentive. He's not motivated in order to spend that money productively. He just knows that I have won the election, money comes into the treasury, and I will spend that money however I want. And here is where it gets actually much worse. There is a 40% inheritance tax. Suppose you work super hard and you build a business and you're making so much money, making million, you build $100 million empire. But by the time you build an empire, you're going to get old. You will be at least 40, 50, best case scenario, old. You might be 60 or 70 years old in most cases where rich people are very old because they spend 10, 20, 30, 50 years in some cases to build that business. And now if you want to inherit that to your children, you have to pay a 40% taxes. Is that literally fair for the rich person who spent his entire life building that business and creating thousands of the jobs in the market? For the last 17 years, the economy has been stagnating. Like the last growth was back in 2008, right before the 2008 financial crisis. Yes, the economy was growing, everything was perfect because the global economy was growing. That was the period of golden age where there was a lot of stability in the world, where everything was growing, where the UK was seen as the global capital of the world, and UK hasn't yet lost most of its economic power. But after that, do you see what happens? Like this is a period where the GDP wasn't growing at all. And right now, if you check, for example, this year, it's the GDP is almost as much as it was back in 2008. What has the UK been doing for the last 17 years? Nothing. It has been literally just surviving, trying to figure out what exactly is happening. But let me tell you a secret that nobody will tell you about is that the rest of the world wasn't simply sitting out there and watching what's happening with the UK. They've been working hard, they've been growing their economies, trying to get better, they've been trying to be more competitive. And that's why a former colony of the British Empire, which was India, has now a larger economy than the entire United Kingdom. What do you think businesses do? They go there. A lot of British businesses have been sold to Indian companies, and that's just one example. China wasn't sitting around. In the exact same period that the British economy didn't grow, the Chinese economy grew 3 times. The US economy grew 2 times. And that's where the problem starts. Like you're paying so much taxes, you're spending so much, but the economy is not growing. So if you're a rich person in the UK paying so much taxes, you're asking yourself a question. Maybe something is wrong. Maybe this taxpayers' money aren't being used wisely. And there is some hope that the British economy is going to keep rising in the next 5 years, up to $4.3 trillion in GDP. But I really doubt these numbers. Last year, the GDP grew by 0.9%. And that's considering that there is real inflation happening in the UK. When there is inflation, prices are rising, so is the economy. And when inflation is so high, the economy is supposed to grow even faster, at least on paper. At least the GDP should grow. But when the GDP is not growing, but inflation is growing, that means that the real economy is actually tanking and going down. The biggest problem is that the UK has a spending problem. You can clearly see that spending has always been higher than revenue. And that means that over the exact same period, the British government has accumulated a lot of debt. And when you get a lot of debt, you get into a lot of trouble. There are wise ways for you to use debt. For example, if you're actually barely making ends meet and you don't have a house, you're probably not going to be productive. But if you can get a mortgage and get yourself a house at a very good interest rate, now you have a house and you can increase your productivity by getting a better job, by actually working harder, by working longer hours. Yes, of course, you're going to overpay for your house because it's a mortgage, but nonetheless, it's worth it. But if you take too many debts and your interest payments on monthly basis are much higher than your job can actually afford it, then over time, you're going to declare bankruptcy. As of the time that I'm recording this video, the debt to GDP ratio is around 100%. Now, this is already too high. Now, some people might say that, well, it's nothing. We have countries that have a much higher debt to GDP ratio, such as Japan. But Japanese economy hasn't been growing since 1996. Do you want the same thing to happen with the British economy? 17 years is a long time, but when your economy doesn't grow for 30 years, like in the case of Japan, you actually get kicked out by every other nation, especially your neighboring country, China, that has 10 times your population. So if the British economy is not going to grow within the next 10 years and the debt keeps growing, this ratio is going to go to at least 150%, probably 200%. You see, the argument that politicians are making is that debts are not a problem. That's not just politicians who are claiming this argument. These are even economists. They're saying that, yes, we have rising debt, but if the GDP is growing much higher than the debt, then at the end of the day, the ratio is going to be pretty much the same as if we haven't changed it at all. That's why we can actually keep borrowing money and the situation won't get out of hands. But the problem is that, unlike GDP, debt is going to grow 100%, but your GDP might not grow at all, just like it happened with the British GDP over the last 17 years. And that actually creates a completely different problem, because right now interest rates are at about 4.7 up to 5%, and that makes borrowing much more expensive. The British government is issuing new debt in order to pay off its older debts. When you have low interest rates, it's not a problem because you can actually borrow money cheaply and pay off your previous debts. But when interest rates right now are at around 5%, you're borrowing money at a much higher rate, which means that you can borrow less money, which means that you can pay off less of your previous debt, which means that you have to adjust your budget in such a way where more money is going to go into paying off your debt instead of all of the things that you decided to spend, such as healthcare, defense, infrastructure. And that's probably another reason that millionaires look at the entire situation. They're like, we're paying a lot of taxes, but where do this money is going to? It's going into paying off the debts that these politicians have borrowed over the last 50 years. And why am I responsible for that? So what's next for the British government? There is a real idea of actually taxing unrealized gains. If you're a rich person investing in the stock market and making a lot of money, your investments are growing. Unless you sell those investments, you're not being taxed. And that makes sense, because what if your investments go down tomorrow? Can you go back to the IRS and tell them, give me back my money because I haven't actually made real money on that? If any country will introduce such taxation, then suddenly you will see overnight like millions of people are going to leave that country. And I'm talking about rich people, people with money, people with investments. Inheritance tax might actually increase from 40% to 60%. If you're a millionaire and you look at the situation in the country and you see what's happening and you see that the government is in trouble, they will come actually introducing new taxes, and you don't want to be a victim of that. Or worst case scenario, they simply can increase corporate taxations. And these are three reasons that drives all rich people out of the country, because they can see that something like that is very possible to happen. The second problem that the British economy has right now is that it has to increase its defense spending. Because if you look at the geopolitical situation, the United States or the current administration made it clear that it does not want to defend the rest of the world, especially the United Kingdom. And if the UK wants to defend itself, then it has to increase its spending. And where are you going to get the money in order to increase spending? Where are you going to get the money in order to build these large ships? The third most important problem that's facing the British economy right now are the tariffs that might be introduced by the US government. The President of the United States have already introduced tariffs against Canada, Mexico, China, and he proposed the idea that once he's done with these three countries, he's going to move to the European Union and introduce tariffs on the European countries. And that includes the United Kingdom. So if the United Kingdom is suffering economically right now, new tariffs are going to squeeze the government and will force it again to move back to the exact same strategy of raising taxes. So if you're wondering why rich people are leaving the UK, now you know the reasons. So the best thing that you can do for yourself right now is to take care of yourself financially, start building a cash cushion, and start building an investing portfolio that will actually get you to financial freedom. Because if you have a 9-to-5 job and you have a business that makes, for example, 6 figures or maybe even less than that, maybe more than that, the only option you have is by building a portfolio that will save you during these turbulent times. And that's it for today, guys. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.